Good evening and thank you for joining Speak Uganda News tonight. I am Shamim Nabakooza in Sarah Ochirot. On the other side of the sign language to take you through the news first, we'll look at what the top stories are.
In our top stories tonight, Olanya returns to Parliament. Legislators pledge support to his bid for speakership. Also tonight, Uganda Law Society warns Chagulanyi legal team, this as they're accused of disputing Supreme Court. And Military Operations Commander Lieutenant Colonel Napoleon Chabihende dragged to court. Journalists demand for disciplinary action against brutality.
Thank you for joining us once again. We're live on air on our social media platforms, Record TV Uganda on Facebook, on Twitter at Record TV UG. You can join the news live right there. Starting off, having sustained injuries after being battered by security agencies last month, journalists have filed a matter in the High Court to compel security agencies and government to put an end to violation of human rights and media freedom. These are demanding, among other things, holding accountable the commander of military operations, Lieutenant Colonel Napoleon Chabihende, who ordered the uncalled for beatings in Kolo.
A number amounting to 20 journalists were battered on the 17th February 2021 by the military police while covering the former presidential candidate Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu, who was delivering a petition to the United Nations Human Rights Commission protesting the human rights violation that's left many with injuries. At the Kampala High Court today, battered journalists filed a case seeking court to declare that the actions of the military officers who beat them up contravened their media freedom and freedom of expression and other rights enshrined in the Ugandan Constitution. This urged that the conduct of the respondents prevented them from executing their work as expected and want the court to hold the respondents liable for human rights violation and misconduct of their duties.
It was very sad. It's unacceptable to some legal minds like me. It's unfortunate what happened to these journalists and others out there. We understand they're out. So the impunity is a political problem. It needs a political solution. But the brutality specifically is a legal issue that courts must handle. And that's why we are in this court.
In the evidence, the applicants implicate Lieutenant Colonel Napoleon for commanding what they describe as a violent gang to assault them in the course of their duties while in the safe coverage zone. These want court to hold Chabihende accountable, having been the commander of the operation.
What we need is total justice, and that's why we are having the commander as one of the respondents in this case, so that the men in uniform, they should know that as you inflict this pain over a journalist, so that they know that as you go to brutalize journalists as they're practicing their work, you will be punished and then you will be accountable as an individual.
Through their lawyers led by Aaron Kiza, the journalists also want the government and Lieutenant Colonel Namanya to compensate them for the general and exemplary damages as well as costs of the suit.
They need substantial and significant compensation because they were disrupted from doing their work and they are injured and they are nursing injuries and some of them are no longer working.
The military paraded officers purported to have meted out violence on the journalists. This believe the act is not enough to compel its officers to the discipline. To date, many journalists are in wheelchairs after being battered while practicing their duties, most being evident in the recently concluded elections. This now await court to set hearing of the matter. Report compiled by Shamim, Nabakooza and Paul Musoke for Speak Uganda, Record TV.
And now the government of Uganda has vowed to take action against schools that are defying the guidelines of Ministry of Education and Sports in the current reopening of schools. Speaking to journalists at Uganda Media Center, Dr. Kedrisa Turiagenda, the Director of Education in the Ministry of Education, has revealed this, saying how they have received reports about school directors who have turned day scholars into boarding sections, noting that it's against the guidelines of the spread of COVID-19 and thus should be condemned.
Speaking to the journalists at the Uganda Media Center, Dr. Kedris Turiagenda, Director Ministry of Education, has revealed that government will take action against all schools that will defy guidelines, adding that they have received reports about school directors turning their schools into boarding sections, something that is against the guidelines to curb the spread of COVID-19.
The rest of the schools are supposed to operate in their formal accepted classification. So what I've learned, and I was out in the field, is that some schools have actually converted some classes into dormitories, They have no facility for boarding, they have no sanitation, they have no security. It's not acceptable. We are going to move out and close them. And I want to request that schools should get back to their original status. If you are a day school, run a day school, allow all children to benefit.
Meanwhile, Alex Kakoza, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education and Sports, has announced school reopening of students living with disabilities, explaining that such schools have small numbers of students compared to other institutions of learning.
Special schools for learners with special needs can be allowed to open all their classes because normally they have fewer students, but this can only be done if they are there to the recommended social distancing SOPs provided to us and circulated to all schools.
Kakoza has also updated on the reopening of semi-candidate classes that began this week on Monday and appealed to the school directors to continue adhering to the guidelines that were put in place to be followed.
Now, schools operating day as day and boarding shall make arrangements to ensure that their learners, are kept separate. Because, the background to this was to ensure that those who are in, when they go in really, as much as possible should not interact with those who are coming out. And when we first reopened for candidates, we even wanted all of them, if possible, to stay in. This is to minimize unnecessary contact with those who are interacting with a bigger public.
He advised schools to avoid increasing school dues and also avoid teaching the non-semi candidates since their time for studies is not yet permitted as a way of curbing the spread of COVID-19.
Of classes that have not yet been called is irregular, he's breaking the law, and it should be reported. Just like the schools that are increasing school fees, because we have not received, normally we say, if you must increase school fees, apply. We look at it and then either say yes or no. And the law allows the Ministry to regulate school fees.
The education sector in the country was paralyzed in March last year following the outbreak of coronavirus until sometime towards the end of 2020 when government allowed final year students to resume their studies. Peace Nabwami, Godwin Kayezi for Record TV, Speak Uganda.
Now, government has announced the resumption of the free electrification of connection policy that allows customers connected to electricity free of charge. This revelation was made by the Minister of Energy, Mary Goreti Tutu, during a press conference today.
In 2018, government launched the Electricity Connection Policy, a free electricity connection policy where customers were required to pay only 20,000 shillings for inspection, and government caters for the remaining connection fees in a move aimed at increasing the number of power connections around the country. Government, however, pulled the plug on the project last year after accumulated errors to power companies caused by COVID-19 financial constraints. However, while addressing journalists today, the Energy Minister Mary Goreti Tutu revealed that government has resumed the project after sorting out some issues.
The Rural Electrification Agency has been able to procure over 87,500 connection materials under the African Development Bank funding, in addition to the 2,598 connection materials under the Islamic Development Bank funding, Phase 1. Secondly, utilizing the Government of Uganda funds for the financial year 2020-2021 releases, government has also allocated 14.2 billion to Uganda Electricity Distribution Company and small service providers to partly pay for already made connections and commence new connections on 8th March 2021.
However, the launch of